Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb Performance Podcast number 4. We're going to talk about the flow pattern of fatigue and solutions. Coach Robb, how we doing?
How you doing, brother? Long time no see.
I know it's been a while since we've done these, and we have a very good explanation on why it's been a few weeks. You went on a little vacation with your bride, but more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, because she's going to find the vacation more important than this, but this is very important. You have been working on some new solutions and some new products for the program. Share with us what you got going.
Well, it's been a great month. Like you said, I want to send my apologies to all of our listeners, and I do appreciate those that reached out to us, making sure that you and I were both doing okay. We're doing great. The month of May and going into June was really busy for us. Many of you guys following us on social media saw that we went over to England. We have a UK elite team over there. So we did some closed door meetings with some sponsors as well as the governing body, NORA, over there. And then we did get a chance to take our daughter to some shows. But what we've been working on for the last couple of months, and that was the main reason why we haven't been together, is we have put together a couple new partnerships together rather, regarding how do we sustain energy for the short term all the way to the long term. So for those of us that ride moto short and fast, we've got to be able to deliver energy very, very quickly and keep it sustainable. And then for those of you that love to ride off road, 3 hours plus, we also have to be able to bridge that gap and then everything in between. So we've been working on 2 particular products, and we'll announce the specificity of these in a few weeks here. But the very first one that we've been working on is we have been striving to come up with the right combination of resources. So you, the end user, using our sports drink energy fuel. As you guys know, we have 3 formulations for that. And the formulations are specifically geared towards intensity and duration. Well, now what we're going to be able to do is we're going to actually have the devices in place to be able to monitor your blood sugar levels, which will give you a specific indication on when you should refuel. And we're also going to be looking at what your perspiration rate is, as well as the profile of that sweat. So we're going to be able to use that information and incorporate it at yet another level of detail when we look at our energy fuel and our recovery fuel products. So we're really proud with that. Like I said, it's been something we've been working on for quite a while. We'll announce the specificity of that, as I mentioned earlier. And then the other thing I want everybody aware of, because some of you have reached out to me regarding our blood evaluation services. We've had a little bit of a hiccup, and we have put together a new, let's call it a relaunch date. We were hoping to get it out June 1st, but just a few little bumps in the road. We will be launching the website completemedsolutions.com officially on July the 15th. And like you and I have talked about, Dan, what we're going to be doing is looking at blood from the standpoint of legitimate health all the way up to and including performance, making sure that we look at the specific bioindicators at a blood chemistry level to make sure that we're not running ourselves into the ground, which quite ironically ties into our conversation today when we look at the subject of what does the flow pattern of fatigue look like? Well, these types of resources are going to be put into place to help alleviate this both on the short and the long term. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that. And again, to all of our subscribers and all of our followers, thank you for your patience. We're just trying to put together a few more products. Like you said, we're all about trying to provide solutions to frustrations. So but I'm glad to be back, man. That's for sure.
Yeah. We will be back on a bi-weekly basis moving forward. You're right. It's weird. Like, people reached out like, hey, are you guys okay? We haven't seen a podcast. So it's pretty incredible that our listeners are in that mode of wanting the content every other week. So we will be back every other week. Coach Robb, I'm super excited about those new solutions that you have coming. It sounds to me, we kind of talked offline, that maybe I won't have to weigh myself before I go ride and weigh myself when I get back with this perspiration solution, which I think is going to be pretty cool.
Yep. It's that's exactly it. The patch itself will give us exactly how much you're sweating, and it will give us a very, very defined recap of what you're losing in the form of electrolytes, whether it be sodium and potassium, calcium, magnesium. And now with our energy fuel, because of the relationship that we have with our manufacturer, as you order your product, we know what kind of adjustments we can make or need to make to that product to fit you a little bit closer. So if you think about it, we're already making an adjustment to the molecular structure of the sugar based on how quickly you need to convert it to energy. We're putting a lactic acid buffer in 2 of our products, and we've got electrolytes. So think about it. You've got the right molecule of sugar, you've got a lactic acid buffer, and then you have the added electrolytes. So if we find that you're losing more sodium and potassium, we can add more of that into it. And then on our we call it the Energy Fuel Plus, that is the one that's 3 hours and above. And, like working with GNCC racers, like with Mike Witowski with Phoenix Honda, you're looking at burning over 3,000 calories in one GNCC race that could be anywhere from 3 hours to 3 hours and 10 minutes. So think about the nutritional demands are completely different once we get beyond that 2.5 to 3 hour mark. So for anybody who's new to the product, we have a product that's geared towards 1 hour, 2 to 3 hours, and 3 hours and above. The sweat patch analysis is going to take it to yet another level. And we're also going to be looking at the glucose. They're called continuous glucose monitors. We are finalizing a deal with that as well. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody who may be new, but like you always say, Dan, we don't want to just talk about the frustrations, because we resonate with those types of frustrations, as all of our subscribers and listeners have. What we want to be known for is not only just describe it, help people understand it, but then follow it up with a batch of solutions. And it's not about peddling product. That is not our intention. If the product already existed, I'd already partner with them. But if it doesn't exist, we're going to create it. And that's just been my MO since day one. That was the genesis behind Energy Fuel and Recovery Fuel, to be honest with you.
Well, I am going to give you a shameless plug to peddle the product, because I strongly believe in the Energy Fuel. I have tried many different sports drinks and hydration fuels and energy fuels and throughout the years, and the stuff that comes from Coach Robb's store is by far the best tasting. It works the best, and if you guys haven't tried it, jump online, get yourself some, and you guys will not regret it.
No,
sorry, Coach Robb, that's just what I do. When I believe in something, I have no problem telling the people that they got to try it. So
no, I appreciate it very much. I mean, we put so much beta testing into it, and since we've gone live with it, it has been well received. And there are a lot of pros that are using it, and we're just not allowed to market it because we're not paying them to use their name. But I don't need to me, I don't need the verification or the validation to be able to put it in a marketing piece. I just feel really comfortable, and I sleep really good at night knowing that we're providing a product that does make a difference. And for some people, that they might say that sounds a little flaky and fluffy, but that's not what I'm trying to do. It's just being an athlete myself. Dan, you and I talk about this off the record. We love to go ride. We love to ride as hard as we can for as long as we can. And if you and I are struggling with sweating and cramping and everything else, well, so are our listeners. Yeah. So when I couldn't find a product that was clean, I couldn't find a product that was geared towards the specificity of intensity, because then we get into osmolality and concentration of carbohydrate. And that's my job, to work with food scientists to make sure that the end user, when they buy a product to go short and fast, that the product meets the demands that they're putting their body under. And if you're going to go up in distance, and you can imagine, like with our endurance division, you have an Olympic or you have a sprint distance triathlon, less than an hour. You have an Olympic distance, the real fast guys, the girls will go around the 2 hour mark. Then you have half Ironman and above. So obviously the product goes across not just moto, it goes across triathlon, it goes across wakeboarding, skateboarding, horse jumping, all the ball and stick sports that we're involved with. So I appreciate the plug, and I do know there's a lot of pros using it. Like I said, makes me proud that they recognize the integrity of the product. But let's face it, I only want to put something out there that's going to produce results for the end user, and that's why we created it. So I do appreciate it.
One of the things I think is totally cool with the product too is that it's always fresh. Like the date, they make it when you order it, so it's fresh product. The date's on the bag. Good high quality stuff. Okay, let's move on, Coach Robb, because I don't want to. We don't want to turn this into a complete plug, but I did want to make sure that that we gave it some love.
Appreciate it. And I hope people understand we're constantly working, and we didn't mean to vacate everybody for a month. So thanks for sticking with us, and welcome back.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's get into it, Coach Robb. Part one of this whole thing with the pattern, the flow pattern of fatigue. We're going to talk about the difference of being tired and an actual disease like HBV or Epstein-Barr. And over the last month, the Motocross Pro Motocross Series has started. We have learned that our 2023 Supercross champion, Chase Sexton, has come down with mono, which, has a connection with EBV. And I think this is a good time to talk about this topic because there's a lot of questions about, how this works and why you get it and how you get it. And Epstein-Barr and chronic fatigue is not just in motocross, supercross, it spans through every sport in the world.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The interesting part is if you look at our 4 verticals of business, we have a motorsports division, we have an endurance division, we have a ball and sticks division, and then we have a weight loss division. Stop and think about when everybody's kind of getting into the crux of the heaviest, most time training and racing is during those hot, humid conditions at exactly the time that their body's already fatigued because of the buildup. So if we just use a calendar, and I know for some people in different parts of the world, the calendar may not work, but just use it for illustration purposes. If you're peaking for your first big race in June, where you're spending the first 4 to 5 months of the year in a build mode, you're going to be in that preseason stage where you're lifting heavy and you're building a big aerobic engine. Think about the cumulative fatigue on the body. Then you move into that pre-competitive phase where you start to add a little bit of speed work. You back off on the load levels in the gym a little bit. Well, now what you've done is the load that you were getting from heavy lifting is being replaced with speed work. Now, even though the volume in the overall load, if you looked at total pounds or kilos lifted, would be less on a piece of paper, if you look at the residual fatigue that starts to stack up, just at the time you should be coming into peak form. And it's not, like you said, it's not just in our motocross world. In the endurance world, like in triathlon, we had a couple really high profile races at the end of Q1 and beginning of Q2 that a couple of the athletes had to tap out because they got diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue. We're going to talk about the difference between all of those, but there's no sport that's immune to it. And Dan, this is something that I hope people, if they've been following our podcast together so far, remember the one that we did where we talked about breaking health and wellness and fitness into decades. And when you and I were talking about, what we don't know comes back to beat us really hard and beat us down when we get into our late 30s, early 40s because of what we didn't know. And it's probably the most important catalyst for why I want to put these shows together. I appreciate your ability and your desire to do this with me. What if we have somebody who's listening today and they have a young athlete? The athlete themselves may think, gosh, when they're talking about all these fatigue stuff, that's senseless. It doesn't really matter. But you've got a parent who's been there and bought that t-shirt and is going to resonate with the things that we're going to talk about. They're going to see. That's why we refer to this as the flow pattern of fatigue, because it's like a series of dominoes. Once they start falling, if you don't either slow them down or stop them altogether, it's the end result is inevitable. And how many people do you and I know in the moto world whose careers have been cut short? There's a couple teams, you and I won't mention any colors or names, but how many number 1 plates do they have? But that rider was only able to do it one time. There's not that repetitive come back and duplicate it. And that's because they smoked themselves so hard getting and achieving the first one, it becomes non-sustainable. And unfortunately, not only were they not capable of duplicating that number 1, notice how their career came to an abrupt end within 1 to 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to talk about this today is our listeners, especially with the internet, the amount of misinformation that's floating around. And I don't ever want the way that I try to present it to come across as disrespectful or condescending, but I just find that the internet convolutes the simplistic, that I'm going to go back to the simplicity of it and say, look, let's think about this from a step-by-step standpoint. So that's why I refer to it as the flow pattern of fatigue, because in the listeners will see here in a moment, a lot of things are put out of place in order, and it just creates a magnitude of confusion for our listeners. Very frustrating.
Yeah, it does. And so Epstein-Barr and mono, like how are they linked and like what do you get first? Because I think there's a misconception there of of you get one before the other, but it's maybe the other way around?
Yeah, exactly. So for the listeners, if you're driving in the car, please just kind of keep an open mind. If you're someplace or you're watching us here on YouTube, please grab a piece of paper and I want you to write down 3 things for me. Number one, and please write them in this order. Number one is the Epstein-Barr virus. You and I will refer to it as EBV for the rest of our show here today. EBV, I want you to underline, italicize, highlight, bold, circle, square the word virus. It's very important. When we think about Epstein-Barr, think about the word virus. The second thing I want you to write down is adrenal fatigue. And in that case, I want you to underline, italicize, circle, bold, highlight the word fatigue. And then the third one is going to be chronic fatigue syndrome. And I want you to emphasize the word syndrome. So look at your piece of paper. You have Epstein-Barr virus is first and foremost. After that, you have adrenal fatigue. And then that leads to chronic fatigue syndrome. Emphasizing the word virus, emphasizing the word fatigue, and then syndrome. So let's go back to your question, Dan, and this is probably one of the most confusing things for people. And this is a staggering statistic. 90% of the entire worldwide population has the Epstein-Barr virus in their system. 90% of the worldwide population. Now, a lot of people get confused. Where does EBV come from? If you remember when we were in middle school and high school, when you got mono, some people who knew a little bit about science would say, oh, you got the kissing disease. Well, I don't know about you, Dan, but when I was young and we had knee-high bottles of Fantana and orange and soda, Coke, Pepsi, whatever. Remember when we had the glass bottles and, you're hot, middle of the summer, you're at the swimming pool and you just passed the bottle around and everybody just drank the Coke and you jumped back in the pool and just kept going, right?
Yep.
Well, that's how easy it is to get the Epstein-Barr virus. You can share a utensil. Hey, check this out, Dan. Taste this chicken cordon bleu. Don't think anything of it. You hand your fork over. You just passed over the EBV virus through saliva. It does get called the kissing disease for obvious reasons, but most of it's sharing a glass, sharing a utensil. But I want everybody to stop and focus on the word virus. Now, here's what's going to upset a few people. The Epstein-Barr virus is actually in the herpes family. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but when you go and you look at the herpes family, people don't realize that there are many, many families of herpes. In fact, if you go and you Google it, there's a total of 8 families of herpes. So I'm going to give you a number, and now you're going to know why we put a number to it. When you look at the Epstein-Barr virus, it's in what we call the herpes virus group number 4. Now, for the listeners, I don't want you to go, too much technology or too technical, I'm out. Bear with me because it's worth understanding. People normally think about herpes as an STD immediately because that's what we've been programmed. It's very, very important because when we start looking at the breaking out of Epstein-Barr virus, yes, if you've got an STD, you're going to see it in obvious locations. But I don't know about you, Dan, but how many times have you had a canker sore breakout or a fever blister breakout on your mouth?
Yeah.
That is that's an external indicator of what you've got going on inside. So stop and think about this. The EBV virus is inside. When it starts to get aggravated, stress, fatigue, inadequate food, inadequate sleep, dehydration, all these things that stack on top of it, all of a sudden you'll break out with a blister. That is an external sign that your body is under a lot of distress. Now, it's interesting. If you look at the word, if you look at herpes if you look at the Greek word hairpin, that's where we get the word herpes. And what's interesting is it stands for, in Greek, it means to creep. Now stop and think about this. You've got a virus that's sitting in your body. It's almost latently laying there waiting to be disturbed, and it gets disturbed through excessive amounts of stress. Now we're only at phase number 1, and that's why I wanted our listeners to put it as a 1, a 2, and a 3. Because Dan, when you and I see a fever blister, there's your first red light that the body's like, hello, we got a problem over here. I'm freaking out, right? I'm overworked. I'm overstressed. Now, when I say worked, in your and I's partnership here with the show, we're talking about intensity, duration, frequency. When you're dealing with professional, Do you own your own business? Do you work for somebody else? Do you like your job? Do you like your boss? Do you like your colleagues? Interpersonal relationships. Are you and your partner getting along? Do you have children? Are things going good? How are finances? We get desensitized to the stacking of stress until we get a fever blister and we go, I'm freaking out, man. I'm getting burnt out here. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up in this context is there's not one of our listeners right now that hasn't gone to their doctor and said, I'm exhausted. And they go and they run their blood work and they go, everything looks good. When we start looking at the subject of chronic fatigue, and you guys can go and do some research on this, there's a high level of frustration because it's not something that's been officially diagnosed and given an official status in the medical world. Adrenal fatigue syndrome, believe it or not, is not a clinical setting or a diagnosis. So for our listeners, how frustrating is it when you go in with symptoms of fatigue, muscular weakness, no energy when you work out, not recovering well? So then you go in and then essentially the sick care system goes, yeah, you're fine. Everything looks good. Your blood work is normal. And so what happens is our listeners get frustrated. They start to think that they're in a bucket talking to themselves. Now, what is so powerful about this is the EBV virus. You go and you get an ointment for that breakout on your face, right? That fever blister, that canker sore. You are not eradicating the EBV virus in your blood. What you're doing is you're taking care of the topical external problem, the blistering, but the EBV goes, because what ends up happening is you recognize you've got a problem, you eat more, you sleep more, you start reducing stress. Well, it goes and it lays dormant until it gets overstressed again, and then it comes out and it rears its ugly head.
So essentially, you're covering up the symptom, right? With the
that's exactly it. The symptom is the canker sore, right? That's what's coming out, and that's what you're seeing. The source of it is the EBV virus, and the EBV virus will show the body's getting overworked through an external breakout. So that ointment will take care of that breakout, but it does not reduce and it does not eliminate the EBV virus. The EBV virus just goes and lays back down in the grass or hides behind a bush. Now, here's what's interesting, because you mentioned it at the very beginning of this subject. Many people think mono leads to EBV. It's the exact opposite. EBV is a precursor to mono. So if you've drank out of a glass after somebody else, you've got the EBV, you may not see symptoms of this for 5-10 years. That's the reason why I want to bring it up in that sequential order. If 90%, 9 out of 10 people have it in their system, and if you want, obviously my whole wheelhouse is about zeros and ones. Out of that 90%, 1 out of 4 people will have mono sometime in their life.
I have a question, Coach Robb.
Yep, go right ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to derail you, but so if 90% of the people have the EBV virus in their body laying dormant, right? Some people may never experience symptoms. They may never, nothing may ever come out. They would never know, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Is there, with blood testing, could you identify somebody that has EBV that has never had a symptom? So they would know that they have EBV, so they would be maybe more conscious to do certain things to, prevent it from raising its ugly head?
You hit the nail on the head. But I have to use myself as an example. When would I go and get blood work? Only after I feel like garbage, and it persists for a long period of time. Now, I was fortunate enough, because I was at the Olympic Training Center as an athlete, our blood work was drawn for completely different reasons. Our blood work was drawn to be looking at RBC count, red blood cell count. They wanted to look at the leukocytes, which is your white blood cell count. That's an indication of infection. So when we get to the Olympic Training Center, if you have somebody that's overtraining and they have a lot of what we call repeat infections or illness, they're looking for a high level of white blood cell count. So, but if you bring it back to our typical listener, when do we normally go to the doctor? When we feel like garbage, when something is wrong. And as you get up the scale of self-awareness, right, the more, for all of our listeners, no matter what your sport of choice is, when you're on and when you're off. And when you're off, you start looking for things. What would be causing this today? This, ironically, is the catalyst behind us putting together our blood evaluation company. If I can get people in the habit of testing their blood every 3 to 4 months, and trust me, I hate needles as much as everybody else does, but if we understand that the cell is essentially the foundation of life, why don't we get a constant snapshot of the blood? If there's anything in disarray, we can fix it before it becomes a problem. That's the most important part. Unfortunately, our system is more, hey, let's manage the sickness instead of try to be proactive and offset. That should be called healthcare. Our system is known as sick care. We only get attention from the physicians after they can start to diagnose and prescribe, where they can make money. They'd rather manage the sickness. If they tell you to eat well, exercise, and do that, how does a physician or a hospital system make money? They don't. So they'd rather wait till you need to get blood work, then they come in. But you bring up a very important component. If you get the blood work, the EBV virus is going to show there. Now, the bad part about it is, if you're somebody who's an elite athlete, maybe even getting paid to be an elite athlete, and you get diagnosed with EBV, they're only going to prescribe 3 things for you. You need to eat, you need to sleep, and you need to reduce stress in your system. And what have we talked about in the first 3 shows together? The exact same thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted people to understand the flow pattern of fatigue, because I'm hoping that we'll get in front of a couple thousand people that will look at that and go, hey, I don't have it yet, but I don't want it either. And they might be in their early 20s. And what would you and I have given for that in our 20s, only a couple years ago?
And then with the complete med solutions that's coming, right? We'll be able to analyze the blood in a finer detail versus what you get at the doctor, right?
Yes.
The ranges are so high at the doctor. There's such a wide range. They tell you it's normal. You're within the normal range, but that doesn't necessarily mean something is correct or right. In a lot of cases, the ranges are too wide. We need to look at it in finer detail, and that's when we can really pinpoint exactly what's going on. Am I correct?
You're 100% correct. If you talk to people that are in the medical field, most will tell you that the blood ranges that we see are not an indication of health, but rather the absence of disease. Stop and think about how scary that is.
Yeah.
So we're bringing on Dr. Scott Brainey, and he is a very accomplished athlete himself. He's got a couple boys that are very, very accomplished. He's obviously a physician himself. It's a perfect mixture, but we're going to be adding, and I don't want anybody to get intimidated by this, we're going to have 3 levels. And I hate to say it this way, but it's just the real world that we live in. You have people that aren't sick, and we're going to have what we call a fundamental foundational blood evaluation, which would be great. If we get our blood work and we're able to get a maintenance program of adjusting exercise intensity and duration, nutrition, volume, and consistency, we could get ahead of it. Well, unfortunately, and we both know guys that are already at level 2. They've already started to feel the negative effects of not eating enough, not sleeping enough, training too hard, training too long. So we're going to have yet another level of biomarkers that we're going to be looking at. And then when we get to level 3, unfortunately, it's kind of like in our sport, Dan, speaking of motocross together, you have people that have hit their head a couple times and have had concussions. You've got people that are starting to see the ramifications of concussions. And then you see people that are on their last leg with concussions being told, hey, you hit your head one more time, you may not wake up. Well, what do you do for that person at level 3 that's at that diagnosis level? They say, if you hit your head again, you're not going to wake up. You don't want to just be told, hey, you're really close to dying because of these concussions. What do you want to do? What do you want to know? What can I do immediately to start turning these symptoms around? We're going to do the same thing with blood. We've got a great relationship with Inside Tracker that's going to help us understand the foundational side of things. We're putting together a mid-tier, which is quite extensive, but it's that person that's not at level 1 and they're not too far gone. And then we are going to go to a level 3 where we've had people report themselves to us where their doctors are like, look, your adrenals are extremely smoked. Your athletic career is essentially over. And if you don't start pulling the parachute now, it's only going to get worse. And we want to be able to give them definitive steps that they can take. Now, again, when it comes to evaluating blood, I know my boundaries. That's out of my wheelhouse. That fits right in the middle of what Dr. Brainey does. And we're not going to be turning big numbers. What we're interested in is making sure that anyone that goes into the program is getting walked through this step by step, month over month, until we can turn these symptoms around. It's not we want to keep anybody in a system. We want to keep people educated on what's going on inside their body. Dan, how many guys have you talked to? That's all they want. You go to the doctors. Why do I feel the way I do? So it's not a sales pitch on the complete med solutions. Listeners to understand, I empathize with the frustration when you go to get blood work and the doc goes, you don't need blood work, you're healthy. You're like, yeah, but I want to be better than good. I want to be excellent. You don't need that blood work. So now you get into, a scuffle with the same person that's supposed to be helping you promote your own health and wellness.
It can be very frustrating and very defeating feeling when somebody's telling you that you're okay, when you know damn well that you're not, and you're not feeling okay. So
yeah,
there's a lot of people out there.
A lot of listeners that are with us today that have been told, oh, it's just in your head.
Yeah.
And that's ironic where we get into phase 2, when we get into adrenal fatigue. A lot of times the doctors are like, you're fine. The blood work is great. It's in your head. I've heard that from so many people. It's not even funny. And that's disheartening.
I want to talk about a little bit more in depth, but before we move on to the actual adrenal fatigue portion, mono itself. Chase Sexton, Supercross champion, got mono now. He obviously had EBV before, turned into mono. What is the exact difference?
Well, just think about it from the most simplistic level. It's just the stacking of fatigue. And mono, it really comes out when the body's underfed, underhydrated, and overworked. Now, again, overwork could be traveling, dealing with a lot of stressful things in and out of athletics, professional, personal. It's just like we did in our first show together. If you look at the idea of stress, personal, professional, financial, and athletic, and remember how we drew a teeter-totter? And on the other side, I said, please draw a box that's the exact same size that you drew on the left side of the equation. Because you can't expect more out of the body than what you put into it. If you only give the body 5 hours of sleep and you're 1,000 calories in the hole and you're chronically dehydrated, hate your boss, and you're not in a good relationship, how much sleep and food do you need to put in before you can finally start to create some level of balance? Right. You cannot ask more from your body than you put in. And I always use the mechanical terms. You're going to drive 1,000 miles and you think a truck under full load can travel 1,000 miles with one tank of gas. If you put it in mechanical terms, it seems unrealistic. Like, you're an idiot, Rob. But that's what we do to our bodies until our bodies can't continue anymore. So you have you got a virus that's laying there latent. It gets agitated through stress. And then what ends up happening is it's almost like taking on another level of fatigue, where it's like, okay, now mononucleosis is starting to develop. And so now you're just stacking. You've got baseline of fatigue, and you now have another level of fatigue. And the disappointing part is, every time you come down with mono, the chances of it coming back go up quicker and quicker and quicker. It takes progressively longer to get rid of it, and it comes back even quicker. So obviously our goal is to do everything we can to never get to that point of exhaustion. But then when you do, that's why it's so frustrating when you look at the athletic world, where they're like, hey, your contract is you got to be out on the track, you got to be out on the field, you've got to be out on the wherever. And all of a sudden the athletes out there, maybe they've only recovered 30 or 40% instead of 100% recovered. So then the chances of it coming back and reoccurring, now I don't mean to be bearer of bad news, comes back quicker, and it usually comes back at a higher level of exhaustion. Now it takes progressively longer to get rid of it, easier to come back, higher level of exhaustion. And you just keep, that's why I'd say I want you to visualize just the stacking of it. Our goal is to keep it from never surfacing versus letting it stack up. And nowadays with the Garmin and everything, it's very easy to catch that.
And if it does surface, to handle it right away and put the proper...
Well, think about this, Dan. When we talk about injuries, what do we always say? The second injury is always worse than the first, because you never recovered from the first one sufficiently.
Yep.
When we're dealing with fatigue, it's very frustrating because we have little ones that still need our attention. We still have to make a living. We still, we have all these other elements called life, right? This sales pitch known as being an adult, as you and I've teased about, it's hard. And we're not playing the victim game, but there's only so much stress that the human body can deal with. And it's interesting, for those that have the piece of paper here on YouTube, or you're taking notes listening to this as a podcast, look at your piece of paper. Epstein-Barr is the virus. You got to do everything you can to manage that thing from rearing its ugly head, because that leads us into the second phase, and that's adrenal fatigue. You've got, and this is my biased opinion, I think we should change the word from adrenal fatigue to fatigue of the adrenal glands. Stop and think about that. Your adrenal glands, their job is to produce hormones. Now, again, I don't want people to get all bent out of shape and say, gosh, this is so technical, I'm going to check out. Just keep it very, very top line. The adrenal glands, most of us understand, hey, that's part of our fight or flight system, right? That's how we deal with stress, is through our adrenal system. Well, your adrenals are also responsible for producing hormones that affect, now please listen to these, and if you're taking notes, it's worth writing them down. It can positively or it can negatively influence your metabolism. You're gaining body weight even though you're gaining body fat even though you're training, because the hormones are getting thrown out of whack because of stress. Obviously, if you're stressed out, your immune system is going to get completely beaten and battered. When you look at the idea that your blood pressure goes up, when you're under a lot of stress, your sex drive goes down. So just put those four together. You have a suppressed immune system, you're gaining weight even though you're exercising, you have low sex drive. Does that not make you want to go work harder in the gym? Because you're gaining body weight. So because of that frustration, we go to the gym and we work harder. Now we suppress our appetite, we suppress our immune system, we suppress our sexual. Now remember, we're all adults here on this show. We're not getting caught up in the idea that we're talking about sex. Talking about the sex hormone that comes from the adrenal glands. So when we start looking at the term adrenal fatigue, what are the big four indicators? And I would encourage everybody to please write these down. Craving simple sugars, tired and you're not able to sleep, night sweats, and low sex drive. Because what we are, Dan, is when we were looking at the Epstein-Barr virus and it was breaking out, we were getting cold sores. Now we have low sex drive, craving simple sugars, night sweats, and we're tired and we can't sleep. Now we have yet another stack of indicators that are in the corner with the big red light going, all right, Dan, the breaking out in your mouth wasn't enough, was it? Well, right. Now you can't sleep. And you're like literally the room is 60 degrees and you're still sweating at night. I keep moving my hand like this to be annoying on purpose, because that's what the body's doing, is it's giving us an external sign of an internal problem. Now, the reason why I say, in my opinion, we should refer to the fatiguing of the adrenal glands, because the glands have more than one role than just deal with stress. We just walk through those. Now, here comes, I hope, the epiphany that a lot of people are going to resonate with. You hear the buzzword of cortisol. And that's why I wanted to present it in the way that I did. You've got to understand that the adrenal glands affect the immune system, and all hormones. When I say all hormones, every hormone in the body, its only responsibility is to communicate, is to send messages. You need to respond, you need to adapt. So here the body is trying to make sure the immune system is strong. It's trying to maintain metabolism. It's trying to maintain blood pressure, specifically the salt level in your blood. Now stop and think about when we go to the doctor and we don't feel good, Dan. And what's the doctor say? Well, here's some blood pressure medicine.
Yep.
What you need to do is look at your stress levels. Hey, you need to go on a diet because you're starting to gain unwanted body weight. What does a diet do to the stress level of a human body, especially when you cut calories? You drive the stress level up.
Yep.
Right? So now you're cutting calories, stress goes up. You're under so much stress, your blood pressure is in disarray. Your stress levels are so high, your immune system is suppressed. Your stress level is so high, your sex drive is suppressed. Now, think about a fuel injector. You've got all this, the fuel injector is releasing a hormone that everybody's heard called cortisol. So when you almost get in a car wreck and you get that flush feeling, that is the cortisol dumping into the bloodstream. Now zoom out to 10,000 feet. You work in an office that you just have a disdain for. You don't like your job, you don't like your colleagues, you don't like anything. So you're just sitting there firing cortisol. The adrenals are like a hamster on a wheel, right? Your second gear pin, whatever analogy you need, the adrenals are adrenaline and they're on red line. You leave your job, you don't like it. You go and you drink and you do alcohol you smoke cigarettes, you do things to stimulate yourself, right? Maybe to mask the pain. Well, all of those are stressors to the body. Let's say that you go, you know what, I'm going to avoid the alcohol and the cigarettes and the other, bad behavior. I'm going to go to the gym. And because I'm putting on this body fat, what's the typical gym person tell you to do, Dan, when you go to the gym?
Just grind as hard as you can.
Smash yourself, baby. Let's knock it out, right? And if you're not committed, you're not this. So now we get the name calling going. So now your adrenalines are really adrenaline. And I say that very sarcastically. The problem is now you left a job you don't like. You go to the gym and you smash yourself. You go home to the stress of little ones, bills, dogs barking, dishes need to be done. Now the adrenals. Now think about how this cascades and creates the perfect scenario for adrenal fatigue. You're so overstressed that when you lay down at night, you have problems going to sleep. And this is where I want our listeners to really take copious notes. If you've had a full day at work, you've taken care of your family, you've taken care of your job, you've gone to the gym and you've worked out, and you go home and you can't sleep, there's another one of those indicators. Remember one of the big four? You're tired and you can't sleep. There's that red light in the corner of the room saying, Dan, you got to pump the brakes a little bit here, bud. Then you don't sleep at night because, hey, I got to get up. I want to get to the gym. I'm committed to losing this body weight. So now you don't sleep. You finally do fall asleep late. You're there for 3 or 4 hours. Well, what do? You get up. Maybe you go to the gym beforehand. Or worst case scenario, we get up. What's the first thing that most of us hit? First beverage we take in the morning when we wake up?
Gotta hit that coffee.
And that caffeine is taking an adrenal system that's sending you a message that says, hey, Dan, you're tired. And you're like, hey, adrenals, suck it up, buttercup. I got to get to work. I need to get to the gym. I got all these lists of things that you have to do, school, work, family, whatever it may be. Now what you've done is when the adrenals need a break, you stimulate the metabolism, which then drives up the stress in the adrenals. And now the adrenals are excreting even more cortisol. Now, bear with me here. The cortisol production levels get so high that it starts to negatively influence. Remember how I said earlier, hormones' role is to communicate? Cortisol is so damn powerful, it will start to skew the other hormones' ability to communicate. And that's when we start to completely fall apart at the seams. And what we have our listeners being told that it's in your head. Think about that.
I want to share the story real quick. So,
Okay.
I've been trying to lose some weight. I've been trying to get back in shape and going to the gym,
Yes,
trying to lose some weight. Well, there for like 3 or 4 weeks, I was drinking nothing but water, like literally nothing but water. And you know me, Coach, I loved my Coca-Cola. Like it was the best. And I love my morning coffee.
Yep.
But for 3 or 4 weeks, I didn't drink anything but water. I'm down like 10 pounds and kind of hit a wall, right? Because I still going to the gym, still on track, but I slipped a little bit because I started drinking my morning coffee again. I actually have not had a Coca-Cola in 2 months now, but like I'll kind of cheat and have like a Sprite or something, to satisfy. Anyhow,
Yeah.
I hit this wall and I started looking at like the calories in coffee and, just what's in the coffee and thinking about what you had shared with me before about, you're stimulating your system with this caffeine in the morning, how it's not good. So I decided, well, let me lay off the coffee again. I laid off the coffee for 2 weeks and I started losing weight again. Like whatever it was the coffee that was hindering me. And maybe it's something else, Coach, but that's what it certainly seems like. I've kind of drilled down to that one thing and now I'm back on track. So I don't know. Maybe it's in my head. Is it in my head?
No, it's not in your head. No, it's exactly what we just discussed. Yeah. The stimulation that comes from caffeine is revving up a metabolism that's already it's getting overworked because of stress, personally, professionally, financially, and then you go to the gym and athletically stack it on top of that. It gets to the point that the stress becomes so high that the cortisol level is going up higher and higher, and cortisol is a fat magnet. So when you reduce the caffeine, hey, if your body's tired, maybe you go back to sleep. That's why we always say that you can't manage time, you can only manage yourself. we all know what time we have to get up tomorrow morning. Well, if you know that you're going to start your day at 6 a.m., then you've got to tuck yourself in bed by 10, because otherwise the math doesn't add up. And I don't live in a glass house. I have nights where, yeah, it's hard to get to bed. There's things to do, right? But to your point though, Dan, when you got the caffeine back out of your system, because I don't know about you, Michaela, my wife always teases me that I add coffee to my creamer. So without me even realizing it, right? I like my International Delight French vanilla, and I make it crisp. Mine's almost white. It almost looks like a milkshake.
Mine too.
Yeah. So now what's happening is I'm driving up my body fat percentage by using caffeine to raise my metabolism on a body that's already over revving. For those of you that like motors, let's take a motorcycle, for example. It's like taking a motor that's got 100 hours, taking it to a track that has a lot of elevation, and do it while it's raining and the track is full of mud. How many more layers of stress can you stack on a bike? Elevation. Well, let's start with the foundation of a tired motor. Let's stack. The radiators are covered in mud. They can't dissipate heat. And let's add elevation. Would any of us be surprised that the motor's going to grenade? No. The difference is when that bike grenades, you and I can go home, and for the most part, we can tear it apart, put it back together, and we can be back riding the next day if we needed to. We get to a point where our adrenals cannot keep up anymore, hence the word adrenal fatigue. Let's go back to number one, EBV. You're getting high levels of stress. You get these external signs, canker sores. We ignore it. Mono ends up stacking up on top of us. And we finally go, okay. I'm going to listen. I'm exhausted. I'm fatigued. You finally succumb and give the body what it needs, right? Pretty simple. More food, more sleep, and more rest. It's kind of a novelty now, isn't it? So now everything subsides down to a point where, all right, you feel good for a couple of days. So what do? We pick right back up where we left off. Unfortunately, if we're just using a percentage, maybe we only recovered to 20% when we should have recovered to 100%. Well, now we're starting at a 20% base. That's why I said earlier, it doesn't take long. It takes shorter and shorter periods of time because our resiliency becomes less. If I take a piece of metal, Dan, take an aluminum can and we bend it, right? You've just weakened it. If I bend it 5 or 6 times, what have I done to the integrity of that aluminum? It's not going to be very long before I can just tear it like a piece of paper. So when you understand getting sick, not recovering from the sickness, increases how quickly it comes back and then how much longer it takes to get healthy, I'm hoping it's starting to make a little bit more shape. Yeah. I do want to say one thing, and I'm going to look at my notes here because I want to make sure people write this down verbatim. If you go and you Google, they'll refer to it as adrenal gland disorder. We're just going to refer to it as adrenal fatigue. Listen to this list of symptoms: upper body obesity, increased body fat around the face and the neck, and yet the thinning of the arms and the legs. Now think about that. You're going to the gym. You're supposed to be building muscle. Your legs and your arms are getting thinner, but your face and around your neck is getting fatter. There's your red light. High blood pressure. How about muscle weakness? All of a sudden, you're noticing that you're starting to lose that muscular power. You start seeing stress fractures. The frailty of the bone starts to go up. Irritability to the point of depression. And then you go and you get your blood work and they tell you you've got dangerously high blood sugar levels. That list comes directly from the Journal of Medicine associated with adrenal fatigue.
Interesting.
Now you go and you Google that, you're going to get some turkey that's on the internet that's going to give you the fix for each one of those. And it's usually going to come in some form of a medication and a pill. What have we been talking about for the first 40 minutes of the show? Stress. That's why, Dan, when you ask me off the record, hey, how do I lose body fat? And I say, reduce stress. And I get people will roll their eyes. I get people that shake their head. They're like, that just doesn't make sense. I got to put myself in a calorie restricted diet. I need to exercise. I need to exercise hard. I need to do high intensity interval training. I need to lift heavy. Now, like we've talked about in previous shows, if you want to go and look at that in a textbook clinical environment, yes, high intensity interval training will stimulate hormones that do make you leaner. But I have to go back to the motor analogy. If the human body is already tired, does it really need HIIT training? Absolutely not.
No.
This whole idea of intermittent fasting, oh, you can sit here and tell me what it leverages and stimulate. I get it. The body's been created in a way that if you get dropped onto an island and starve, yeah, abandoned, it's going to try to find a way to survive. I will grant you that.
Sure.
Doesn't mean it's healthy though. And that's the part of, you put yourself in a mode of intermittent fasting on top of being in a bad job, being in a bad relationship, being financially strapped and going to the gym and smashing yourself. And then you gain body fat, or for the athletes watching this, you go and you perform below what you think you're capable of because of the amount of work you put in. What's the first thing we do on Monday morning when we get beat on Saturday? Smash it.
Yep.
Right? Not realizing that the reason why we're getting beat by people that we've never been beat by, here's the key word, before, is because I'm getting out of shape or they're in better shape. When it could be something as simple as you're getting more and more stressed out. They're not any fitter. You're just more stressed out. And now they're able to inch right up to you, catch you, and now they're dropping you. So what does that do to the human being, especially men? We peacock up. We're going to go get it. We're going to get after it because that's what we've been taught, right?
Yep.
So now you look at this series, this is why we call it the process of fatigue, right? What does this whole process look like? Starts with a virus, gets stacked, adds another level of disease, a lot of times doesn't get a chance to fully recover. Then because the adrenals are overworking, it literally throws off all of the other hormones and communication. And now what are we left with? Now we're left, and I want everybody to write this down. You may have had this from a previous show. Cells make up tissue. Tissue makes up an organ, and a series of organs make up systems. Well, remember how we were talking earlier that the cell is the foundation of life? So what we're trying to figure out is if the chemistry of the blood is in disarray, you got to adjust your food. That's what gets the nutrients in your blood up. Well, then what depletes the human cell? Stress. Stress from working out, stress from work, stress from family, stress from finances. So this little cell that's running through your body is getting depleted because of everything that we stack on top of it, and we don't eat and we don't sleep enough to rebuild it. So the adrenal system, because it's one of the responsibilities of the adrenal glands, is to accommodate stress. Our listeners know it is fight or flight. You see how now we're just redline pin and we're 30 years old going, why do I have all this body fat? So when you go to the gym, you smash yourself.
Yeah.
You got the finances, you can pay for a trainer.
There's one thing that I do want to get into. We kind of talked about the recovery, right? You just touched on it. It's the food, the quantity and quality, sleep, same thing, quality and quantity of your sleep, and then the stress, right? But there's one thing after fatigue, and that's chronic fatigue syndrome. Yep. And I think when we hear of the word syndrome, we think of really bad. And can you touch on that just briefly?
No, you hit the nail on the head. That's why I wanted you to write it down in kind of a sequence from cell to tissue, tissue to organ, organ to systems. If you go back and you recognize that the adrenal gland, right, it's in that endocrine system. The endocrine system is the system in our body that's hormones. As we said earlier, hormones' only role is to communicate, tell the body what to do next. Fight or flight, either get eaten by an animal or run for your life, right? That's the part of the body that responds to, not the brain, the hormonal communication inside the body to deal with that stress. It releases adrenaline and you can run faster than you've ever run when you think you're going to get eaten by a lion. It's amazing. So if you look at this as a sequence, the reason why we call it a syndrome is because we've gone through a virus that got stacked. Let's just assume, Dan, to your point earlier, that you get tagged with mono, so now it just double stacks. Maybe you go a year and you have another relapse of mono, so now you've got 2 or 3 years of that stacking on top of each other. You do that for a long enough period of time. Remember how we said cells lead to tissue, tissues to organs, organs to a system? That's when we get to the idea that you're now officially diseased. That's why it's called a syndrome. Because once the body is diseased, and that, notice I said the body, because unfortunately that disease of fatigue permeates everything. Your muscles, they get tired quickly. Remember we said you become irritable. You get so irritable that nobody wants to be around you. And then that creates a cascade of issues. So now you go to the gym, your batteries never get recharged. You go spend time with friends and family, everybody gets on your last final nerve. You don't like your job. You don't like your partner. And then you feel like the world's starting to close down on you. And you're like, screw it. I'm just going to go to a quiet, dark room and go to sleep. And then you sit there and you stare at the ceiling fan. This is a body that's been third gear pinned and it just can't go anymore. And that's why we call it a syndrome, because at that point, you've been diagnosed and re-diagnosed with the same chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Because the adrenal fatigue, you've had the night sweats, the craving, the simple sugars, the low sex drive, you're tired and you can't fall asleep, and you ignored them until finally the system has to pull up the SOS flag and say, I'm out, uncle, tapping out here. There's nothing else I can do. The system cannot fight the stress anymore. And what's disappointing is once you get to this level, the doctors are going to tell you what I said earlier: reduce stress, eat more, sleep more. And they'll even take it so far as to say, you've got to eat healthy. And to me, what does healthy consist of? Fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. I'm not going to start bugging you about percentages of macros. I'm not going to say, is it 50% carbs? You could, again, if your diet consists predominantly of a protein, a fruit, and a vegetable, every time you open your mouth, it's low glycemic. It balances the alkalinity and pH. Any rebuttal that somebody wants to give you, you and I talked about this off the record, Dan, just keep nutrition in the center and keep it straight and narrow. You don't need to do anything to an extreme. There's nothing wrong with a piece of fruit. Oh, it has fruit sugar. Yeah, but it also has a lot of vitamins and minerals which support the immune system. Oh, animal protein has a lot of fat. Yeah, you need fat to conduct your nervous system and protect your internal organs. If you're a strict vegan, you have your own moral reasons for doing that. I don't judge it. I think it's great. I'm just saying, if you're using a strict vegan diet for protein, you've got your sources. I'm just using it as an example. What people will try to refute and try to say, oh, you shouldn't eat that way. And they go to some extreme left or extreme right or up or down or whatever. Stop. You're just creating excessive stress on the body. And Dan, this is why when you texted me and you're saying, hey, what do I need to do to drop body fat? And what was the very first thing I sent back to you? Reduce stress.
Yep.
Stress is the culprit, because at a hormonal level, that fuel injector is just injecting cortisol, which is a byproduct of stress, which throws off all the other hormones. Now you're screwing up hormones like estrogen, testosterone, all of these hormones, adrenaline, all these melatonin, things that are supposed to lift you up, things that are supposed to put you to sleep, things that are supposed to allow you to enjoy having an amorous relationship. It just gets completely obliterated because the cortisol fuel injector is just jacking the rest of the hormones up.
Yep.
And then you get to a point where now you're diseased and they go, hey man, sorry. And you're like, say what? And that's, Dan, where I'm so proud of you getting the Garmin, because the Garmin gives us a body battery. It gives us a resting heart rate. It gives us HRV. It gives us sleep quality and quantity. You can import your MyFitnessPal and look at your food intake versus your calorie expenditure at rest and as that activity. So you start putting all those together. What have you got? Finding out how many calories you should eat, not what the numbers say, not what some generic formula says or what some turkey on the internet says. Know your specific calorie burn rate. Use MyFitnessPal. It imports into Garmin, so you can look at calories in versus burnt. Keep that gap to a minimum. When you exercise, are you exercising to burn fat or trying to get fast, which is going to burn more sugar? Understand how to replace that. Understand how much water you need during the day, how much you lose during sweat. Minimize that stress on the system, just like any other motor. We look at fuel, we look at oil, and we look at radiator.
Yep.
Same thing on the body.
I've been having fun. I've been having fun with my watch too. I got a sync to my Lit Pros last times, and it's a lot of fun. It's good. I want to wrap this up. Before we do that, I just want to hit on some key takeaways. Fatigue-related symptoms, they definitely can be avoided. The disease could be avoided. And why wait until it gets to the disease stage, right? You can take control at any time. You get your blood evaluated, get on the right path, get there before it gets bad. And honestly, it's when it gets bad, the doctor's going to tell you to do exactly what we already told you to do, and that's get the proper sleep, the proper nutrition, and lower your stress. So it's very simple. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. What am I missing, Coach Robb?
Nothing whatsoever. It's interesting because I'm not the one that I'm just trying to help people understand physiology and nutrition. And when people start following this and then they do go in for their annual checkup, how many times have you heard the doctor say, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it? And that, that's great to hear. It's just, what if you're fit like myself? I'm 54 years old and you're hearing that for the first time. You're like, well, for the love of God, what if I'd heard this 25 years ago? Maybe things could have been different. Maybe I don't have that high level of body fat. Maybe I'm not on, blood pressure medicine or whatever. And stop and think about this as well, Dan. When you look at the idea, what supports an immune system? Vitamins and minerals. Where do those come from? Fruits and vegetables. What rebuilds the immune system? What rebuilds lean muscle mass? High quality protein sources. So when we say eat fruits, vegetables, and lean protein, what does that give you? What does that provide you? Provides you strong muscles, ligaments. Now your reduction of injury is minimal. It gives the immune system what it needs. So now you have less downtime because of an illness. If you're satisfying hunger and you're managing stress, now you sleep like a baby. Now your body, when you go to sleep, releases HGH and testosterone, which are the recovery hormones that can only be released during sleep for the most part. So think, you've just reversed the entire cycle by eating enough, setting yourself up for sleep, managing stress, get all the benefits of rest, because when you go to bed at night, it rejuvenates all of the systems, all of the organs, all the muscles and the connective tissue. You wake up tomorrow leaner and stronger than you were before you went to bed, not because of the work that you did, but your ability to absorb and adapt. That's the whole idea. People get caught up on this word, anabolic. You either are putting your body in a state of growth, anabolic growth, it's getting leaner and stronger, or you're putting the body into a chronic state of catabolic, it's tearing itself down. Today, what we've talked about is at a hormonal level, which leads to obesity and all the other negative ramifications of stress. So I'm hoping that we've gotten in front of a lot of younger people or parents who have young athletes. Let's not let them fall victim into, not the word victim the way society does today, but you don't know what you don't know. But now that you've listened to this, hopefully this will hedge off a lot of the mistakes that we made. Kind of like for those in the moto world where Hunter keeps saying that he was the guinea pig and that's why Jet's catapulting so quickly. And Dazzy, the dad, said the same thing. We learned a lot putting Hunter through it, and Jet's reaping the benefits of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great way to kind of wrap it up for those who understand moto, and for those that don't, it might be a great story to look up, the Jet and Hunter Lawrence story. It's a good one. So hopefully this makes a difference, Dan.
Coach Robb, it's been real. I missed you, buddy. I'm glad we could do this today, and I'm looking forward to the next one in a week and a half from now. A week and a half, no, 2 weeks from now. Yep. Thank you guys so much for following us on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Make sure you share it with your friends. If you like what we do, make sure you share it. Tell them what we're doing. Get them to like and subscribe our podcast as well. If you have any questions or concerns or anything like that about this podcast or anything specifically for Coach Robb, you can reach out at contact@coachrobb.com.
Perfect.
Very good about getting back to everybody. And I thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Peace out.